All right, the Bland Boys are back with another one. In this video, we're going to go over how to use global prompts versus global nodes in Bland. And as usual, I got my compadre here, the guru, the legend himself, Mr. Taha.
Let's do this, man. I'm hyped for this one. This one's gonna be a lot shorter than the last ones, right? Because I'll try to keep it quick fire, and also I think just conceptually, maybe I used to get this wrong all the time. They're super easy to confuse in the beginning, but once that I guess that box kind of ticks, you're like, that makes sense, right? So probably be one of the shorter ones.
Yeah, so this won't be too bad compared to our other ones. And if you want to look at our other videos, you'll see that we made one on conversational pathways. That one was kind of an hour. And we also did one very detailed, a deep dive on condition options and how to write those. So this is kind of building on top of that. So if you're missing that additional information, just go give those a quick watch and then come back and then we'll be ready to go.
Yeah, I'll assume everybody who's watching, I will assume that you have some sort of basic understanding of Bland as a platform. And this is just to kind of, or if you've been watching the entire playlist, then this is just the next steps, right? Or something you're going to counter very, very early on, which is super powerful. Same format as last time. I've got a Google Doc and we'll link it somewhere in the description below. Feel free to follow along if you will. I won't go through every single word on the doc just because I don't want to spend a bunch of time reading, and I'll switch back and forth between Bland and Google Docs as required.
Perfect. Then let's get it. Let's get it rolling.
Let's do it, man. Global prompts versus global nodes in Bland. And before I actually start a conversation, I had a meeting with the Bland owners, the Bland guys, a couple of days ago about all the stuff that we're going to talk about in this video. And I'm happy to say that this is kind of the accumulation of our findings, right? From personal experience to actual input from the Bland team themselves in order to hopefully help a lot of you kind of get these lessons without the scars, right? Because it took quite a while to figure out how to use as well or as best as possible. And it doesn't mean because we have to go through it that everybody else does as well.
Right. So you're getting a double serving of sauce. You're getting sauce from the people that built the platform and the sauce from people that are implementing the platform.
Yes, sir.
There
All
you
right.
go.
So starting with global prompts, right? And for anybody who's maybe a bit newer to Bland, global prompt is on this little corner right here, and I'll refresh my page, or I can just leave it like that. Global prompt is this little thing in the corner that says add a global prompt to all nodes. It's this thing right here. What this basically does is the best way to visualize it is that it is a prompt that's basically in every single little node or little prompt. So if you've been using Blend for any amount of time, the way it works, you have a bunch of different cards here, right? And these cards are basically representations of smaller, tiny prompts, right? So for example, in this one, I have a prompt that says, welcome the caller to this roofing company, right? That's the tiny prompt. But what the global prompt allows me to do, it allows me to give context to the entire conversation without having to put it in every single small prompt. Basically, it's a prompt that is automatically added to every other prompt in the background automatically. What that does, or the main use cases for this, is context for why are we on the phone call? Well, we use it for a lot of times, and I'll show it here. Is there's a thing called situation, exactly. So this is an inbound agent, and right here I'll highlight it. It says you're answering the phone to somebody who's called us. They may be a potential customer looking to book, a current customer needing help with something, or something else. But by just having this, the way that the agent will interact, the way that it will respond, it will always remember that, hey, look, I'm on the phone with this person from who's looking to call to either book an appointment or needs help with the current task. It's not an email, it's not a text message, it's an actual phone call. In the way that it says words, in the way it says things that are much more natural sounding over voice than text.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the overall purpose of global prompt, is basically something like just give it context. Like, who is this agent, right? Right here you can see your name's Eve, dedicated receptionist for XY roofing company, ran by this person, your tasks. I mean, if you've done prompting at all, this will be pretty familiar. This is basically you just giving a lot of context and situational awareness to your agent. Whole purpose of it, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so I'm seeing you're using some hashtags, aka Markdown, in the bottom of the
Yeah,
prompt there near the context.
yeah.
Is there a reason why you're only using it there, not in the other categories?
Correct. Yeah, great question, actually. Good observation. This was because the other day I was having trouble where this agent it would always say this exact sentence, meaning, and I didn't want it to say that, but I also wanted to know about it. But I wanted it to say in more natural sounding ways, right? So, I guess the workaround that we found for this was to be like, look, if it's repeating the same things, but it has to know that, look, we can book appointments, and they're not, keep in mind, this is for a construction company. Most of these companies, they work by appointments, meaning that the person will actually go to the person's house to inspect the roof, whatever. This company doesn't work like that. They do virtual appointments first. Now, how do I tell that to the agent? And I also don't want it to say this exact sentence. Well, I just use context, which is basically a way of telling the assistant that, look, this is for you. Like, it's not like, don't say this to the user. This is just for your own knowledge, for your own context.
Yeah, it's like
That's
an
the best way.
FYI. So you're giving a subtle FYI by giving
Exactly.
it that. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. 100%. And as you can see here, I mean, feel free to literally just copy this global prompt. We pretty much use it for all of the agents that we build. Of course, we tweak the tasks and the sort of context, but the main sort of formatting very, very similar to this: who they are, who they work with, who's the owner of the company, or like who's the main contact person. So if somebody says who owns this company, they have somebody to refer to. Their main task. I liked putting this just to give it a bit of situational awareness as well, meaning that I mean, we have this deployed, which means our date is always date time. But in your case, it might be something like now, which is like pre-built within the Bland platform to always be equivalent to the current date. The situation right here, the tasks we said earlier, and just a bit more information about the agent as a whole. That's how you write the global prompt. Some characteristics, I'll go through these pretty straightforwardly. It's everywhere, meaning in every single node, you don't have to rewrite the whole thing. It's always there in the background. You can literally just imagine it as being above the prompt that you just wrote. Consistency, just make sure that basically the entire robot sounds the same. Foundational, personality, ethical guidelines, brand voice and values, etc., etc. That's pretty much the global prompt. It's fairly straightforward. When you're actually making these, I'll make sure that you're clear, you're specific in personality, tone, and behavior. If can I make jokes? Is it supposed to be super serious? A little bit of nugget right here. Whenever you're doing something that's more sales oriented, in the sense that appointment booking, that's inbound, that's outbound. Sorry, so somebody filled up a form and you're calling them. One thing that we found pretty useful to make it even just a little bit more human is you tell it to basically speak in a way that it feels like with a slight hit of confusion. I mean, like, hey, did you just apply to this? Like, you're not affirming that they did. You're not telling them anything, but you're kind of asking them. It just comes off as more natural. Even salespeople, a big part of the way that they sell is they'll ask questions with just a tiny little hint of confusion. So just inject that into your agents if you're doing anything sales related. Makes it that much more natural.
I think Alex Hormozi has something like this where he says he asks question with childlike curiosity.
Yeah,
Is it kind of like that, basically?
exactly like that. That's exactly how it is. It's for sales.
Yeah, exactly. I got you.
Like, you're trying to like help them, right? You're not telling them, "Oh, you need this or you need that." It's like, well, would this help you? Would that be kind of what you're kind of looking for? Like, you want to make it seem like this is this is not a cold conversation for you, right? Like, you're actually genuinely concerned and you're not super sure about what they want.
Yeah.
Tips, real quick: be clear, be specific. Obviously, ethical boundaries, align the prompt with your brand, and keep it focused on high level concepts. So you don't have to go into the nitty gritty details unless there's a specific point that you wanted to know, such as for us, most construction companies don't do virtual meetings before the appointment, but this one does, which is why I felt the need to actually specify it, because it is out of the norm.
Mm.
And I mean, it's pretty short, but that's kind of the overview of global prompts. Does that feel like that answers that question mark?
I mean, the goal is to answer the question with a few words as possible. So, in doing that, I think it makes sense. I think if anyone that's watching this has even the slightest bit of coding background,
Sure.
in coding, you have things called global variables and local variables. A global variable is a variable you declare outside of all your functions that affects everything. Then a local variable is one that you define within a function. So it only references the function while it's running. So in the same way, you have this global prompt, which is kind of encapsulating across all the different nodes in your pathways. That's kind of how to think about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't have a coding background, the best way to think about it is to just take this document, take a screenshot. I'm taking your idea, Mark, from the other
The
video.
last video, yeah.
Yeah. Just take a screenshot of this, put it into ChatGPT or Claude, tell, look, make this, but for this use case. Now, by the way, it can be kind of a pain to do this because a lot of times it'll actually take the prompt as the instructions you're giving it. But
This
if
is what
you're
you do. This is what you do to counteract that.
okay,
So In your role, you say, act as a prompt engineer for a conversational AI platform. Here's a typical type of prompt that you write. And then you take this screenshot and you paste it into ChatGPT. And then it actually transcribes it. And then it'll actually understand, okay, I'm a prompt engineer. I'm not going to actually execute this. I'm going to help you write a better prompt. And then you give it your constraints under that prompt.
Well, there you go. I didn't even know that. So thank you, Mark. All right. So that I think covers a lot of prompts. Now, of course, any questions, concerns, feel free to drop them in the comments. We'll try our very best to answer them.
All right, so that was global prompts, and now we're going to navigate to global nodes, which is its long lost cousin. This is not as complicated as global prompts, but there is some nuance, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we'll keep this a bit. I mean, we'll try to keep it short and sweet. I've got my handy little Google Doc here, and for the uninitiated among us, right? Basically, the global node is a node. It's very similar to the rest of the nodes within Bland, but it's just that this node can be accessed from anywhere. Wherein the main differentiator, the global prompt, is the global prompt applies to everything. It's like the backdrop, right? Or it's like the invisible prompt behind every other prompt. The global node is just another card, but the condition or the specialty about it is that wherever you are in the conversation, you can access it. A
Right.
really good use case for this is a knowledge base because you don't want to, I mean, of course, you can tie it to a specific card where if somebody follows a specific path, they might have some questions. Let's say, for example, you're an insurance company or your medical practice and you have a bunch of insurance questions and you know that they tend to appear within this sort of sector of the conversation. Well, you can have a specialized knowledge base node for that. But in the majority of cases, people have this tendency to just jurt out word like questions, right? Like you'll be asking them, "Oh yeah, what's your name? Yeah, my name's John. By the way, do you guys do metal for a roofing company?" Happens all the time. So the easiest way to differentiate or the easiest way to deal with unexpected questions is having these global nodes. That's what they help in because within the agent, even on the back end, it's basically an option or a condition that is attached to every single other node that says, look, if the user asks about X, go here. And for knowledge base, for in this specific example, the description of the condition that has to be fulfilled in order for this node to be activated is the user has a question about services offered and or about the clinic. Choose this pathway when the user has questions concerning procedures, prices, and overall. That's just the general node that we have among the entire conversation. So I don't have to be worried about, oh, but what if this at this specific point, what if they ask about this, what if they ask about that? Because I know that regardless, if they ask about the clinic or they ask about the services, I have my handy global node hand
Right. So
there.
just to differentiate, so global prompt is kind of dictating across all nodes and all pathways, while a global node is accessible, meaning it doesn't dictate what happens, but you can call on it, you can use it, kind of like a function call throughout that pathway. Is that like a good way to differentiate both?
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's one of them is active across the entire agent. The other one you could even consider almost passive until you call it, but it's also accessible from anywhere.
Okay, perfect.
And the cool thing is that even if this sort of knowledge base, or even if this global node doesn't necessarily like, even if somebody is in the middle of a conversation, they ask a question, it will still, using the help of the global prompt, it will still be able to continue the conversation. Quick example: if I do start test pathway, right, and this is an appointment confirming robot, and I say, can I speak with first name, last name? Sure. I want to confirm that you'll be at your appointment coming up on this date. By the way, what do this is for a dental clinic? Do you do mercury fillings? Right now, this is not a question that this has access to at all. By the way, do you do mercury fillings? Now you might see that this will actually jump from mercury into this. It also jump from this node into this one because this is where it's getting the answer from. And then it says, "Do you have any other questions?" If I say no, can you still make it to your appointment? So it still remembers the conversation. It actually went back to where it was because it answered the conversation.
It's kind of like when you have these global nodes, you can take side quests, but it doesn't take you off of your main quest. So you
Yeah,
can go take care of a side question, but you're still focused and you have a memory of what's your call to action, which in this case is making sure that the prospective client can make their appointment.
exactly. And that's kind of how that's the sort of the basis of the global node. If I go here now, like I said last time, I won't necessarily go over the entire document. It'll be available, but characteristics or the key sort of points of it is accessibility and flexibility. Allows you to kind of make your thing more human, more spontaneous almost. Super common use cases. We use it for every single knowledge base. We just found it so much easier to just have a knowledge base global node on every single one. And actually, side note, another one that we recently started implementing is an end call global node. So sometimes, just for reasons, somebody wants to end the call, and either they can't reach their phone, they're on speaker, whatever. We started putting global nodes as end calls, so and it activates if the user wants to end the call. So they have an out if they don't want to end the call themselves. Escalations. I think I mentioned this in a previous video, but call transfer is a huge thing. And one thing that we do in order to mitigate constant call transfer is this will be a call transfer like node, right? That will activate whenever a user wants to talk to a human. What we found actually is we also put a friction node right below the call transfer node. And what this basically says is, hey, look, make sure that this person actually wants to be transferred to a human. And the condition is, hey, look, do not move on until they either confirm or deny that they want to be transferred. If they do, then you actually transfer them. But having this little friction point avoids unnecessary transferring, because sometimes it can get really fragile. And even if the agent suggests you want to be transferred, it'll just trigger that transfer node and automatically start calling the other person. It's not a great experience for the user.
Right. So this is basically a very purposeful speed bump that we're putting along the way to make sure that there's some friction and there's a layer of security before it gets pushed to an automatic transfer since it's so sensitive.
Exactly. And then taking actions. Another really good use case is, let's say, for example, you have an inbound receptionist agent, right? People calling in to ask questions. They're calling in to ask about, well, not only about the business, but also about maybe their own specific projects, etc. Well, it's kind of hard to, what's the word? It's kind of hard to anticipate the conversational flow for inbound receptionists. So what we found is you make the appointment start a global node, which means basically it's connected. Like people, if at the mention of book an appointment, it will have a dedicated arm that it goes down whenever somebody wants to book an appointment. So we don't necessarily have to anticipate every single direction the call will go, because we know that if at any point they mention interest of actually booking an appointment, we have a dedicated arm that is specialized or focused on just making that happen, from gathering the necessary details to actually getting the available dates, etc., etc.
Do you want to explain what a webhook is to someone who has no idea what that means?
That's a great point. The Within Bland, there's what we do is basically we don't necessarily rely on Bland's webhooks capabilities just because we've had trouble with it recently, which is completely fair, right? Their focus is on the functionality and making sure that the conversational pathways are being respected. But we just use a third party in order to get the available dates. So we'll send a webhook away to something like Make or Zapier, which will get the available dates. It'll return it back to the Bland agent, and it can then work with that. Same thing for post call. We do like if somebody wants to book an appointment, once the conversation is over, we'll send a webhook over to Make, Zapier, N8N, whatever you want. And that's where the processing of, look, what happened in that conversation, what type of appointment did they want, what did they book it for, etc., etc. And that's what the webhooks is basically like a bridge between Bland and other applications, whether it's Google Sheets, Airtable, OpenPhone, all of that.
Yeah. So maybe to put it in perspective, create a little analogy so everyone can understand. Is imagine that all these pathways are your employees throughout the call.
Sure.
A webhook is a contractor, like a subcontractor that kind of works with your company that goes off and takes care of some different things they need to do consulting on. So if someone mentions I want to book an appointment, that contractor goes and does consulting with your calendar apps or your CRM. If it needs to go enter some information, then it goes and consults with Google Sheets through its own integration, its own bridge. So think of it as an add-on to your existing pathway that if you don't use Bland's native one, you have a backup with this contractor employee to help you out.
That's actually a really good analogy. And then just some tips real quick before we wrap up. Basically, identify the most common situations or requests that arise, and then just make global notes for those. Make sure they're super clear in conditions. So when should these be triggered? If it's a knowledge base, well, when the user has questions about X, Y, or Z, use that. It's about the business. If you have a lot of data, then you could even separate it further, where you can have, if the user is asking about this specific portion of our of our website, if you have 300 pages worth of documents that you need to go through on this agent, you could separate it or fractionalize it like that, and design the global nodes to handle specific situations concisely and efficiently, and then use them sparingly. Like, don't overuse them, otherwise it can get a bit lost, which kind of defeats the whole purpose. And yeah, the example scenario. Oh yeah, this is a really good example actually. So let's say we have an agent for a travel booking website. The global prompt would define the personality. This kind of ties both of them together as a friendly and knowledgeable travel assistant. Then, while they're actually going ahead and let's say they're booking their stay, if in the middle of the conversation they say, by the way, what are the visa requirements for X country? Well, that's precisely where you would have a global node with a knowledge base about the either asking them what specific country they're from, and then of course the country they're going to, and it'll actually be able to pull from its knowledge base about um, those specific requirements, and then go back into the conversation about, all right, well, now I just need your social security number, I just need your passport, etc., etc. Just a quick little example there about how they can be used. And conclusion, or the sort of long story short, global prompts are prompts that go behind every single node, and global nodes are action or knowledge that can be accessed from anywhere within the conversation under specific conditions.
There you go. So I know it's a bit longer than I probably would have intended, but we noticed while filming this that we probably wanted to go a bit more detailed and make sure we actually show you an example so you can contextualize both options. But hopefully this helps unmuddy the muddy waters in terms of the difference between the two. And this is a very powerful concept that you can use to make your conversational pathways and your overall agent that much more bespoke. So if you have any additional questions on this concept or any others, let us know in the comments below. We love the feedback. It keeps this rolling. Other than that, thank you so much, Taha, for this very detailed explanation.
No, it's a pleasure, man.
And if you're watching all these playlists and these videos and you're thinking that this is great, but you want us to do it for you, that's a service that we offer fully managed to actually build this for you, run it, and maintain it. So if that interests you, we'll leave some links in the description below on how you can actually contact us.
Thank you, Mark.
Awesome. Thanks.